Welcome to the uh, Bug Bounty Village Bash Talk. Full disclosure, full color. Um, my name is Abhinav. I'm founder of Hackerware, and we combine electronic art with hardware hacking, and we make one-of-a-kind conference badges. And so we have been doing it for 9 years now. And over the course of time, we built our own Bash Life lab, where we do tons of these cool experiments and always trying to do something that's never done before. And so I have traveled, I think personally, like 15 countries with hardware villages and badges, purely for the badges. And our work has made it to like almost 19 countries now. So we connect communities through hardware and gamifying hardware security education. And so I started just because I wanted to do something cool. But over the time, I realized it promoted creativity and curiosity and my passion for hacking. And so, if you have seen last year's Bug Bounty Village badge, which was like a blinky badge, and we did a cool UV print on top of it. And the whole idea was we wanted to bring some sort of matrix effect for the background LEDs, but then we really were short on time, so we just went like a very simple transistor circuit that just blinks the LEDs. So for this year, I really wanted to come back to the matrix raining core effect. I really wanted to incorporate that somehow. And so the idea was we would use an acrylic. We would make it like a 3D design. Part of the design is on the acrylic, and then other part is on the PCB, and both of them are sandwiched. And the PCB has all the components and all the LEDs behind it. And we would, of course, this time we would not just make it blink, you will throw in a CTF and make it more interactive experience and make it more engaging and fun. And we also wanted to have a special edition for pre-orders, and that was again not to the matrix like the green color version, but it has the same specs and features as the blue version, so there's no change in the BOM or the schematics. It's all the same. It's just the colors are different and the LED colors are different. And so we had this for pre-orders. I think we ran out of pre-orders now, so it was a great way to support the village while we were at it. And so this is what we came up with. We wanted a top hacker logo printed on acrylic, and then have the screws for mounting to add some height, and then have all the LEDs and all the components on the PCB. And so, and of course, the components on the back side of PCB. So it's almost like a multiple layer design, so to speak. And so this is what we really wanted to do this time. And so for the PCB design, we just went with outlining the bug bounty logo shape. Of course, we had to separate the hacker hoodie part, if you have seen on the top here. We separated that and bought that for the acrylic cutouts. And then for the bottom, we had like a whole shape of the PCB. And so all the components are on this double-sided PCB, powered by Atmega 16A, because one is really easily hackable. Second, you can reprogram it if you want, and you don't need really specific tools. There's lots of open source tools that you can use to reprogram the badge, so you're more than welcome to reprogram the badge and maybe build something of your own version or something of your own creativity with it. And so we use total of 41 SMDLEs, which are like extremely small. We had 4 push button switches for the CTF mechanism. And so the whole schematics is geared towards balancing out how do we make it pretty and interesting, but at the same time, how do we also have some functionality and feature built into it. And so this was the PCB design. This is all the PCB, and you can see the visible part of the PCB has all the LEDs on it. So front side has all the 41 mini SMD LEDs, which are machine soldered because it's hard to solder by hand. And then you have four push button switches at the bottom for CTF. Um, and so those buttons we use were very specific. They had a long travel, which is like they have a longer head, and so they would poke through the acrylic. And we don't have to cut out the entire switch acrylic; just had to cut out the switch head acrylic. And so and for the CTF, we have the bottom four LEDs. So those glow when you type in the CTF flags. And if those are correct, then they unlock and glow those LEDs. Otherwise, they don't do. If the flag is incorrect, it don't do anything. Um, and so if you turn off the badge and then turn it on for 3 seconds, it gives you like a glimpse of all the LEDs, how it looks like when it's unlocked. And then it goes to whatever you have solved and what you have unlocked so far. And so this was the back side of the board. We had a sponsor, so we could give away a big chunk of the badge just in the village. We didn't sell that, so that we give away for free. So thanks to the sponsor, Inspective. And then we had all the MCU, the resistors, on-off switches, all of that on the back side. And so initially we wanted to go ahead with a couple of coin cells, similar to last year. But then we wanted people to have the badges glowing all 4 days of the conference. And that's how we came up with the triple SLs. Another alternative a lot of people might use is the LiPo batteries, which are like rechargeable. But the issue with them is there's a safety hazard if those are not properly covered and they don't have a proper housing where they fit in. And so triple SLs being much more safer, that was the default choice, really. And so we do our own fabrication in-house. So this was some of the early pictures of the fabrication with all the PCBs and panels that you can see. And so there's something, this is something we came up with in 2013, UV printing. So one of the badge we made in 2013 was RSA conference badge. And so the RSA conference badge, when we made, they had the brand guidelines that they needed the color corrected. And the logo had like 5 different colors. And so with the traditional PCBs, it would have been next to impossible to get the exact shades on it. And so we experimented with UV printing and came up with a process where we can put the UV printing on badges. And that just unlocked a whole lot of a new world of possibilities for us. It's a very specific, it's an added process in the production, but it's the one which has lots of flexibility, and it's much more faster and much more clearer as well. And so this year we took it one step further, which with adding a transparent protective coat to enhance its durability in ambient conditions and temperature changes. So so has been a stretch of 2 years of constantly playing around with it and figuring out how to keep making it better. And so for the UV printing, we used on both the PCB and the acrylic. First, starting with the acrylic layer, we have the hacker part of the logo in the acrylic cutout. We mirror image it, and then we paste it on the bottom side of acrylic. And so we have the holes drilled precisely for the CTF push button switches, as I said, the longer heads to poke through. And then they're all mounted on PCB with height using nut bolts, so to increase the height between acrylic and the PCB. And then, we mirrored it upside down when we printed the artwork. So this was one of the early results. So the UV printer, it's a giant machine which goes back and forth as it sprays the ink. And this is one of the trick we do is we print on the bed first, and then we just align the acrylic cutouts on top of the bed, and then print on top of them. And so this was one of the early acrylic layer cutouts. that we did in the original logo. And then this was one of the PCB assembly test. We had the PCBs, and then we assemble all the LEDs and just layering it over, and we would know, yeah, it works just the way I expected, and nothing needed to be changed at that point. And so on a PCB layer now, we were UV printing on the PCB layer. We're done with acrylic. And so the way UV print works is you just load a PNG or a PDF artwork in a machine and adjust the print positions on the bed. And then it's 2 feet by 3 feet footprint. And you can fit maybe 60 to 70 badges, and takes like around half an hour. So that's the process, and it takes a bit of time, but it's worth the effort. And you can see the switches here, which have higher head travel, and those would poke through the, as I said, those would poke through the acrylic holes. And so this is the badge assembly. This is the badge assembly. Putting everything together, and you would know it works. And putting all the screws and all the components on there. Some of the components we have to hand solder them, and we do tons of that hand soldering work actually. And so this is the CTF journey. There's a CTF website for the village, and you play the CTF village, and you will get the flags in the binary, and then you have the mechanism on the badge to place those binary flags on the badge itself. And so if it's right, it starts unlocking the lights at the bottom one after another. So there are 4 flags, and then there are 4 CTF LEDs that you can unlock, and have some bragging rights about that. And so we started the production, and then we started realizing some of the badges had this tiny bubbles forming underneath the LEDs, and then part of the coating started peeling off from the edges. And this is still fairly cosmetic, and none of it is like actually functional sort of an issue. It's cosmetic on the background where the LEDs are dropping. That was the portion where it was this issue was. And so we started thinking what to do about this, because at that point we already had done a lot of production, and we couldn't redo the production, and we couldn't change the Gerber files at that point. And so we went into lots of thought and trying to figure out what else we can do to make sure the UV layer sticks to the PCB. And eventually we thought over it, and eventually we realized there could be one solution that we can use, and that solution was the epoxy coating. Now the epoxy coating is again never used for badges before at all, and so of course we would walk into that very risky territory where we had to take that gamble and hope it plays out. And so epoxy coating is used for waterproofing. It's used for floor coatings as well, automobile parts. Water needs protection from weather damage. They use it for that. And so there's the epoxy resin, and then you mix epoxy hardener in it. And you have to do it in smaller batches. And so you mix them, and you mix it for like 30 seconds, and you have the solution ready. But then you have to apply within 15 minutes because then it hardens again and you can't use it. And so it's all this really tedious process of figuring out how to import that into our workflow for the badge making. And we had to buy lots of brushes because the brush bristles would get really hard, and those would become unusable. And so we started experimenting with this. Apply it within 15 minutes, make small batches, and then so we observe after 2 hours it starts to settle down, but it really ideally it needed like a 24 hours timeline to cure entirely. But then we also realize if we try putting it in an oven, it does speed up a bit. So it's all this experimentation that's been happening at this point just to fix this really tiny imperfection that we really didn't want, and because it didn't look nice, but it had no, like as I said, no functional change to the badge. It just was like cosmetic stuff, and so we started with that, and so now we arrived at a spot where at the very bottom we have the black PCB masking, then we have the primer coating for the UV layer. So the primer coating is again done by the UV machine itself, and then we print the white UV layer because we want the color correction to be precise. What happens is if you print just the artwork on a say a black PCB, it changes the color shades when you look at it, and so we have to put this fully white layer, almost like a canvas. And so we put this white UV layer for color correction, and then we put the blue or green artwork layer, the actual UV layer, and then of course we had our varnish coating, which we had been using from last year to protect it from weather damage, and then finally now we had on top of it the epoxy coating, like the thick, shiny, and glossy epoxy coating, giving it like a slightly hardened but really smooth look. And it looked really clear, and it looked really nice. And so now what we ended up was a PCB with 6 layers of coating on top of it. And so we thought, yeah, let's add epoxy layer for all the badges. Then looks nice, and if you can see, it's highly glossy as well. It's really glossy, and it's hardened, so it looks really nice. And so we thought, yeah, it fixes the problem, right? And then yeah, the meme, like, it fixes the problem, right? So it turns out now we had early imperfections, and now we have late imperfections. And so when we did the epoxy process, when the coating was solidifying, it contracts. And when it contracts, now it is pulling the UV print layer, which was printed beneath it. And now what we have is part of the UV layer that is now pulled off, and it looked weird. It looked like it has bubbles inside it. And then some of the badges, they didn't have LEDs working. Turns out the UV layer, some of the times, it altered the LED connections as well on the pads. So now some badges don't have LEDs working. And we also realized if the chemicals aren't mixed in right proportions, it doesn't cure, and then it forms like a really delicious gel, but you can't eat it. But it looks like a really nice gel. And yeah, and again, all of this happening, and we just keep changing the brush because the bristles get hard after a while. And so, and now we have late imperfections in the design, and we don't know what to do because no one else has done this in the world before us. And so we don't have any reference points on what happens from here. And so we started seeing that still a good chunk of the badges, they were still fine. It just a small chunk of them had these really imperfect issues. And so we started redoing, it's called rework. We started reworking the badges. So disassemble the entire badge, unscrew it, start putting some heat from the backside, and then start putting some heat on the edges, and then try to pull it off. Then desolder the switches, remove the switches, then continue adding more hot air between the epoxy layer and the PCB. So it's everything is reversing and going back to where we were maybe like 3 weeks ago. And so it took like 10 minutes for each PCB with our newly invented process, even though it's just reversing what we had done. And then we managed to damage lots of LEDs in this process because now the LEDs were hardened with epoxy and they came off with the epoxy now. And so Yeah, and that now became a much longer workflow where we have basically went three steps ahead and then we came back four steps back. Um, and so we had to hand solder again all of the LEDs once again. And at this point, we couldn't solder the LEDs in the machine because we had other components on the other side and other stuff on the badge, and that wouldn't survive the reflow one. And so now we are hand soldering all of the LEDs again, and then we soldered all the LEDs, and then we just made a workflow. So we UV print the layer once we have the LEDs, then solder the switches again, and making sure the heat doesn't transfer to UV layers. Test it for the circuit, apply the UV coating, and then let it cure, and then again test it for the circuit, and then do the final acrylic assembly. And so then comes the programming, and then quality test and packaging. And so all of this redoing, we did add at least 5 times where we would test the code and we would test the circuit and how if it works all right or not. And with that and lots of blood, sweat, and tears, we managed to get every single badge working in the way we wanted. And so that was how the Plug Bounty badge came to be. The blue one was the giveaway version in the village, and the green one was the pre-order version. If you want to support the village, they had that for you, the special edition as we called it. And so eventually we realized, with the research that went into this epoxy idea, earlier we were using hot glue and acrylic for LEDs which are mounted, reverse mounted on the badge. And so realized we can probably use the epoxy coating instead of hot glue, because hot glue is messy and it's slow and it doesn't look nice. So it doesn't have a nice finish. And so we started doing that, and now we had one more tool on arsenal to use for reverse mounted LEDs to spread the light even more. And that became a process for another badge that you're seeing here. It was like it spreads the light really well on the back side of the board. And so that essentially what is the story with the Pug Bounty badge. And if you have questions, I'm gonna take the questions now. Yeah. Oh yeah, yes.
Was that the manufacturer mixing like a ratio, or did you have to customize the ratios for that?
So his question is, when we did the epoxy coating, was that the manufacturer ratio or did we customize the ratio? It was actually the manufacturer's ratio is 2:1. So 2 parts of epoxy and 1 parts of hardener. So that was essentially what was the recommended by manufacturer ratio. We didn't want to play around with it as much as we were motivated, because we already had a lot of on our plate to play with. But that has worked out fine for us. Just 2:1 epoxy versus hardener. Yeah. Any other?
So when you were having issues with it then, was it because you weren't hitting that 2:1 ratio right with your mix, or not mixing sufficient?
Right. Right. So his question is, the issues we had in epoxy, did it had to be with the ratio of 2:1? No, it didn't have to do with the ratio. The issue was the epoxy coating. When it's applied, it's very harsh and it's very strong for PCB application, actually. So it was more of a chemical composition that made it pull the LEDs and the epoxy and the UV print layer from it. So it wasn't the ratio, but it was just the chemicals being a bit too harsh for PCB use. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're good. So yeah, we have the website, hackaway.io/BBV, has all the resources for this badge and how to punch in your CTO flags and all. And that's also my website, hackaway.io. And yeah, that was the last slide. Thanks so much for coming.